Hi, so I thought I would say a little bit about consent because it's a kind of hot topic at the moment, and society in general seem to be realizing that consent is really important and it's not okay for people to overstep other people's boundaries. We need to get a yes before we do something intimate. And it's really great that this is being acknowledged. I really celebrate that. And there is more to consent than making sure that we don't violate other people's boundaries. It's a little bit like, to make an analogy, we've had a lot of car crashes happening. We've seen car crashes happening. So now we're teaching people to use the brakes on their car. That's a great thing. But we can get more from using the brakes on our car than just preventing accidents. It actually makes the experience of driving a lot more comfortable. It improves the journey, it makes it more pleasurable. And this is true with intimacy. When we're able to have consent, it makes that intimacy more pleasurable, and it affects the rest of our lives as well. It makes our lives in general more pleasurable. So I'm going to talk a little bit about why that is, and also why consent is important for everyone. Saying no is important for everyone, because I think there is this spectrum of people, and I know this from the workshops that I run on consent. So some people will show up and they really know that they're not able to say no. So perhaps they're a bit of a pleaser in their lives, and they kind of identified this as a thing, and they know that they've got a problem with it. For other people, they're able to say no, and they know that, and it seems like, well, what's in this for me? I respect other people's boundaries, and I'm able to say no. What is it about boundaries? Why is this important? And there can even be a culture that I'm okay. I'm actually okay with my sexuality. I don't really need to say no very much because I'm okay with it. So there can be this different ways of people kind of relate to the idea of consent. But for everyone, there can be a massive importance in learning to tune in on a deep level so we can sense when we need to pause and when we need to say no. And I know this because years ago, when I first showed up on a workshop doing this kind of work, I was one of those people who could say no really clearly, and it really was clear, my no. And I thought, well, I've got nothing to really do in this work. And as we began to explore it experientially, to begin with, I was kind of saying yes all the time because that's what I felt was true. But then I began to realize that when I connected more deeply with myself, when I was in a deep intimacy with myself, there were actually times when I was needing to slow down, where I was needing to say pause and stop. And the amazing thing about this, the amazing thing was that by slowing down, by slowing intimacy down, we actually make the experience stronger, more powerful, more nourishing, more rich. So back then, my kind of thinking around it was, well, if I don't say no, then I get more. So I don't want to say no. But there's a way that we can slow everything down where we come to a state of regulation, and that means that more can come in and touch us. We can move into our connections where we're listening to all the little vulnerable parts within us, and we're responding to them and saying when they need a pause, which means we can arrive in our intimate connections with all of us on board, so that all of us are touched, so that we're really met and really nourished. And when we're able to do this, we can stay regulated, we can stay relaxed as we connect. So what often happens well, one of three things. Let's kind of split it up into layers. There's a kind of bottom layer, which is like our normal experience. Nothing much is happening. It's kind of a everyday, like going through life. And then there's like the middle zone, which is like the really nice zone where like we're having quite a rich experience. We're allowing ourselves to move forward towards our edges, but we're deeply listening, we're deeply connected. And our nervous system is relaxed, which means that it's open. It means that we're receiving, we're alive in all of our feelings. And then there's a top layer, which is where we've kind of overstepped. We've gone too far, and our nervous system becomes dysregulated. Now, what this means is that we're not going to feel, we're not going to experience as much on this top layer. And it can feel overwhelming. But for some people, and this was the case for me, this is like the experience of excitement. It's a kind of like highly charged area. But there isn't actually as much experience and sensation when we kind of overstep, when we don't say no, when we go too far for us. So I'm really saying this, and I'm using myself as an example to point out that for all of us, there are points when we need to pause and say no. And the deep, more intimate, the more connected we become with ourselves, the more sensitive we become, and the more we realize that we need to slow and pause. And the more we tune in, the deeper and richer our connections can be. So the other thing that saying no, that being able to use the brakes on our car allows us to do, is it allows us to be able to explore more freely. Within intimacy, the normality, unfortunately, within our society is for people not to say the words no and pause whilst they're being intimate with someone else. And there can be a fear, well, if I say, oh, I need to pause a moment, I actually just need to pause and breathe, then what's my partner's response going to be to that? Are they going to be offended? Is that going to shut down the intimacy completely? So people learn to say yes when they really mean no, just to kind of get some connection, get some intimacy. And this extends to our lives, like the way that we live our lives. So culturally, it's quite hard to actually say no to something. So if someone invites us out to something, we can feel a kind of obligation and then go along with it. And we can find ourselves in this situation where we're going and hanging out with a friend and we don't actually want to be there. We feel obliged to do it. And it may be the case that our friend as well is having these exactly the same thing, right? They might be saying yes as well when they're not wanting to hang out. So we can even have this situation when we're both there because we think that we should be there. But if you think about it, not saying no, saying yes when you really mean no, is quite unkind, because most of us don't really want to be hanging out with someone who doesn't want to be there with us. We don't really want to be making love with someone who doesn't want to make love with us. So although it may seem like a bit harsh sometimes to say no, or it might not be the status quo, it's actually the kindest way to be. And within our connections, when we're able to have that understanding and that communication, and be able to say pause and breathe, then we know that our partner is going to say stop when they need to. Now what this does is it brings a lot of relief. It means that things are really, really clear. And that gives a license to explore more. It actually allows more wildness. It allows more passion. Because, and I think this is particularly the case for people who identify as a man, and I know this has been my experience, there's a real relief when I know that the person I'm relating with is going to give me a clear no, because then I know that what I'm bringing is welcome, and that I can bring whatever flows. And if it's not right for them, they're going to let me know. Wow, what a relief. It's so good to be able to have that clear communication. And then connection can really happen. So I think one of the reasons why it's quite challenging to voice our no and to be honest about it is that when we're on the receiving end of it, we can have a lot of feelings about it. And so, for example, I might really want to go out for a cup of tea with someone, and I'm really there and I'm honest in my wanting of that, and they might say no to me, and I might have some feelings about that. They might also have some feelings about having said no to me, and maybe that might mess up our friendship or whatever. So there can be a lot of stories and feelings that are there. But by being honest, we're actually really honouring each other. So we're not making each other wrong. That's really important. So I'm there in my wanting, I want to hang out with them and go out for this cup of tea, and I'm really eager. And I can be in that, and I can be honest in my wanting and my feelings. And at that time, and it may change for them, but at that time, it's a no for them. So they're honest and they're valuing their feelings. And when they communicate that to me, they're not making me wrong. I'm not wrong for my wanting to have a cup of tea with them. It's totally innocent. And they're not wrong in their not wanting that. We can both be true in what is alive for us. We can both be real. And then we get to meet as who we really are. We don't have to pretend to be something different or shape ourselves into what we think the other wants to receive. The other thing is that if we can't say no, we can't really say yes. So just in terms of our lives, if we're saying yes to all the things we don't actually want to do, it means we miss out and we can't put our energy into what our heart really wants us to do. So our no gives us permission to value ourselves, to value what we really want. And it gives us a kind of confidence. So if you can't say no, and if you have a habit of pleasing, then you might know this one. It can feel really risky to say yes. Because if you say yes to the cup of tea, then maybe they want intimacy. Maybe they want a relationship. And even in our society, there can be this idea of like, well, if I say yes to tea and then I say no to intimacy, am I leading them on? But when we're able to say no, when you're able to be really empowered in that, you can say yes to the cup of tea if you want that, and then bring the no in whenever it's needed. So saying no, having the brake on the car, actually allows you to be able to say yes. So it gives a lot of permission for us to be us and for the other person to be who they really are. So I think that's all I wanted to say for now. And this topic, it kind of fits in. I know I've been talking a lot about intimacy, but it's not just intimacy, it's within the whole of our lives that we can honor ourselves and honor the person we're with by deeply listening to what is true within us and deeply respecting what we hear from the other person. And what would life be like, right, if we went around and we were all doing that? If we were all completely honest, not in a harsh way, but in a gentle but honest way about what's true for us. then we would get to find out things a lot more clearly and do what we really want to do. And it would build a lot more connection. Because we're being honest, we get to be ourselves and connect more deeply. So you probably noticed that I haven't said very much about how to say no. I've talked about why no is important and boundaries are important. And that's what I wanted to talk about in this live. But also, there's a limited amount that you can learn about boundaries, about consent, about saying no from a talk or from a book. It's really, really important to have a felt sense of experience so that you can experience in your body a real felt sense of what it's like to listen to the most delicate parts of you and voice them. And often we need a kind of container, because actually there's a kind of, we need to feel safe in order to do that. So this is a lot of the work that I do and is part of Living Tantra. So I think the next workshop we have coming up, which really focuses specifically on this area, is Introduction to Living Tantra, which is I think it's in November. Anyway, I'll put a link beside this Facebook Live. That's a day event. And I think there's still one place left for Living Tantra, which is at the Living Tantra 1 at the start of October. So if you've got any questions, please put them in the comments here, and I'll respond in some way. It's really good to get feedback on these lives, and also the kind of things to talk about in them. And yeah, I hope that's been useful, and makes you realise that this is a useful topic. I think like years ago it would have been useful for me to have heard this kind of thing, and I think the more people who know how deep this topic of consent goes, the better our society can become at really honouring each other. Okay, so goodbye for now, and I will be back soon with more Facebook Lives.